My name is Christina Jackson, and I am the Executive Director of Washington Council of Lawyers. Sorry, I have a little bit of a cold, so things are not coming out as clearly as I would like. We are excited to welcome you to Professional Presence Digital Edition. We're going to go beyond the LinkedIn profile and the, what you should or shouldn't post to something really substantive that is going to help you now and later in your career. This month, we are all about growth at Washington Council of Lawyers. So we're starting here with your professional presence. Next Monday, we will talk with Jim Sandman about leadership and how to take advantage of growth opportunities and how to plan for leadership in incremental steps so that when it's time to look at big leadership opportunities, you are prepared. And then our fall kickoff is September 21st at 6:30 at Goodwin Proctor. So grab a friend, come see what we're all about, and meet our new board members and find out more about our committees and our work. Our program today is recorded. So if there are folks who aren't able to attend or have to leave early, we will send the recording to everyone who registered when we are finished. And you can check out all of our upcoming events and more information on our website. We have a lot to talk about, so I am now going to turn it over to Renata Aguilera Titus, who is the Director of Communications and Development at the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless, and she is going to take us through this fantastic program. So Renata, take it away.
Thanks, Christina, and great to see everyone here. Thank you for being here. I'm Renata, as Christina said, so I'm just gonna hop in. But before I do, we're not a massive group today, and I just want to say that I welcome anyone who wants to throw something in the chat, a comment. I'll kind of post some questions here or there, and you're welcome to take those as an opportunity to think to yourself or to respond in the chat and see if we get some back and forth going, or if you just want to chime in. This is going to be, I'm going to call it, it's sort of a workshop style, but you can go through this process totally on your own. We're going to be thinking through strategy and approach to your professional presence. I usually come at things from the organizational perspective because that's my day job, but a lot of this can be applied to individuals. So in your individual capacity in your own life, sort of contemplate what we're going to talk about today. And like I said, feel free to, I see the chat box here, okay. Feel free to chime in. All right, so we're going to start with, why are you here today? This is a topic that I think it's kind of one of those things that's everywhere, the internet, social media, being online. I think it's pretty pervasive at this point. So it might be like, it might have felt like an obvious thing, oh, hey, I should think about these things, but let's try to think a little more deeply than that. What are your specific goals for using these tools in your professional online presence? Some folks might be trying to support your own organization's advocacy platforms, or is trying to establish yourself as an expert or a thought leader in a particular area. Some of you might be trying to move into a new area of expertise. You might be searching for a new job or trying to establish credibility. So a lot of reasons why you might be spending an hour of your Wednesday evening thinking about this specifically, but just kind of call to mind what that is, and where that's the frame you're going to use as we continue to move through this process here. And some of you may have been asked to consider these things like by your actual employer now. So that, that's another possibility. So just kind of call to mind what those things might be. And there's something I want to say before we get into the meat of this. I do communications for my day job. I don't think this can be said too often. This is a boundary setting opportunity. You're adding to your professional presence online. That means you're adding to your footprint online. You're adding to the amount of time you spend each week being online and thinking about being online. So there is no end to the content you can find online, and you could create content yourself all day, every day, and be totally absorbed with it. So I think we're gonna name that before we move forward and think about where you can enhance your professional day-to-day with your online presence and where you need to draw the line. We are all searching for that work-life balance that's easier some weeks than others to achieve. The social media, because it's a never-ending stream of content, is something that we need to keep an eye on. There's a clip I saw floating around recently of Prince talking about the internet. I'm going to paraphrase, but it goes something like, it's cool to get on the computer, but don't let the computer get on you. It's cool to use the computer, but don't let the computer use you. In social media, we are the product in many instances. I don't pretend to know the full meaning of what Prince was getting at with that, but I do feel comfortable saying that that's common sense words of wisdom at this point, given what we know about social media content and algorithms. So I'm just going to put that out there for us to consider. And the other thing to consider is you all are lawyers. I'm not a lawyer. I hang out with lawyers all the time. I work with lawyers, but I am not. So your various employers, organizations, law firms, what have you, probably do have a social media policy. And there may be ethics considerations that you need to be aware of. So you should keep that in mind and always review the guidance from your employer or ethics experts that you have at your disposal. And as always, those common sense rules apply. It's on the internet, assume it's there forever and anyone can find it. All right. So as we said, there's a lot of reasons why you might be thinking, coming to this conversation today, but this is a WCL event. You have public interest on the brain always. You might have some sort of mission-driven or advocacy-driven reason for wanting to think more deeply about these things. So I'm going to frame things in that way. You're going to kind of see that theme here. But just know if your mission is that, right? And if it's actually, oh no, I actually want to switch fields and I want to enhance my presence in like a new area and become more of a established credibility in a new area, you can apply a lot of this, to that as well. Regardless of what your goal is, you're going to have to think about a few things here. Who's your audience? Who are you talking to? Who's in your network? Who's going to be seeing your stuff? Who do you want to be seeing it? Is your network reflective of who you're trying to reach? What's your current capacity? We can talk all day about how to create graphics and messaging, and those are really important things. That all takes time. So setting kind of goals for yourself, I think, is helpful, especially when we try to establish those balances, boundaries that we talked about earlier. What can you manage? Think about that. And depending on your goal and kind of the area you want to delve into here, what's your current level of expertise? Perhaps the first thing on your personal agenda is to do some more learning, to kind of survey what the conversation is right now around that area, to learn kind of the terminology, how people are talking about these things, who are the experts in the field that you should get to know. The answer to these various questions will in part answer this last question, the bottom right pile here. Which platforms will help you get there? There's obviously multiple social media platforms out there. They all have different pros and cons depending on what your goal is. I always say to my team, social media is a means, not an end. Like I said, you could post all day, every day, and that would totally take up your time. But it's a tool. It's a tool that we're using to reach some goal. And the other thing to consider is the amount of time you spend on social media. Part of it is going to be you putting information out there, creating content, and then you might be on social media to learn. You might be on there trying to find articles or blog posts or posts from organizations that are doing work in a field you want to become more familiar with. So you're going to balance those two activities, I would say, against each other. And So on platforms, we've got, I mean, just kind of the obvious ones: LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and then there are others that I think I think those are the main ones. So anyone heavily using a platform that I didn't say, or have one of those that are your go-to, the one you kind of want to focus on, the one that's most helpful to you? Throw that in the chat. In terms of professional presence, I think LinkedIn comes to mind the most for me. Yeah, LinkedIn. Snapchat, that's another one. You know, I don't use Snapchat. I got to say, for our organization. I'm seeing a lot of LinkedIn. Yeah. LinkedIn, I had to say, when I thought about this conversation, LinkedIn is the one that that came to mind the most for me. So I was just curious if there was another vote for LinkedIn. Okay, that's great. All right. So sounds like there's a little bit of variety, but LinkedIn's kind of our main go-to. But regardless of whatever profile or platform you favor, you are speaking in your individual voice here. We're not talking about organizational presence, we're talking about yours. So your style and your voice, I'm not going to go so far as to say the word brand, but I think that might start to become applicable. I think some folks do, even on an individual level, kind of create or promote a brand of some kind. But at minimum, your style and your voice. So you've got to say you have an advocacy oriented goal. What kind of language and terminology is considered helpful in that arena? Are you aware of it? Are you comfortable with it? Those are questions you want to know the answer to. Another really important thing to name, especially in the advocacy space, but I think in most areas, is, you know, when you're speaking from the individual perspective, you're speaking in the first person. It's you. So what side of the story is yours authentically to tell? There's sort of a problem that happens sometimes where social media users develop main character syndrome when it's not appropriate. So I think everyone in this room is probably smart enough not to do that, but it's something that can sneak up on you. So you want to just contemplate that, especially if we're talking about an advocacy oriented goal where there is an impacted population or an impacted group, where an injustice or an unjust policy or what have you, whatever, you know, resources are not being allocated correctly and people are suffering. Who's really impacted there, and what role are you playing in the story when you talk about that? So if there's another voice that should be centered in that story, how can you amplify that? And that's part of something that you want to be aware of. You want to know where to find those voices, what community groups or people are there working in that space that are getting the impacted voices into the conversation, and how can you amplify that and be in a strategic way. But your voice is an asset, no matter what role you're playing. So think of scenarios, of course, where you should maybe consider not being the main character, but then there are scenarios where you can add an interesting, maybe even unique perspective. So you find that place of authenticity and use it. Having an array of voices speaking to an issue from various perspectives can be really powerful when the messaging is aligned. So the organization you're looking to support, or perhaps your employer organization, I don't know, they might find it really helpful to have your voice kind of join the conversation from your perspective around this issue. So it's use your voice, just kind of think about it, think about how you're going to use your voice in relation to the topic you're trying to talk about. All right. So a lot of talk about content. Like I said, we could be talking about content, doing content stuff all the time. Part of the way to strategically use your time that is spent on creating content, think about why you're doing it. Whatever your goal is, we talked at the beginning, what's your reason? What's your reason for trying to be online and really buff up this presence? That's your goal. How to create content that furthers that goal instead of just spinning your wheels all day long, because you can, because it's social media. So you're gonna look for where the source material is. Maybe it's in your head. That's kind of awesome. Maybe it's not. Maybe you need to look to people who are directly impacted by the issue. Again, we have that advocacy frame here. But maybe if you're job searching, you're looking to network, professional networks, professional associations. Washington Council of Lawyers is a network. People who are thought leaders in that area, or journalists who cover that topic that are trustworthy sources. Industry leaders and experts, organizations that you respect that are doing good work in that area. Kind of find who you want to go to for perspective and content, or information rather. And I recommend having multiple, right? It's better to triangulate and get information from multiple sources. And that will help inform your messaging efforts and what you put out with your voice. Few examples of what you might put out on your channel. You might write something original. You might write a post, a reflective post in your voice, or a blog post. I don't know if any bloggers are in the room. You might engage with posts with other people in your network. It's not just about posting if you want to expand your network and kind of your the conversations that you're in and who's seeing you and all that, it's going to be about engaging strategically with other people's content as well. You might share an article and include a little bit of your perspective on that article. Or you might actually go and create some graphics and other content yourself, other visuals. Visuals are fantastic on social media. They, a post with only text performs much worse than a post with video or graphics. Again, those are time consuming, but worth it if you have a goal there. All right. So we're thinking a little bit about content we might create. We're thinking a little bit about what our goal is. Who are we talking to? Because your goal and your goal might be the same. Your content and your messaging and how you present it will vary from audience to audience. I think we all intuitively know that. If you're at a cocktail party or lunch with a group of friends, you're going to interact differently. You might talk about the same topic with them as you do at a work function. You might do so differently. Your tone's going to be different. The language you use is going to be different. Same thing applies here. The internet is vast, and yes, your posts are public. You should always assume everyone can see it and you'll see it forever. But your network is a specific one. Spending some time getting to know what that is, or even trying to expand it strategically, will help you craft messaging that lands in the way you want it to and accomplishes what you want it to accomplish. So this is kind of that workshop element I talked about earlier. You've got a piece of paper out, take some notes. You just want to kind of mind wander and think about this. That's cool too. What do you want your audience to know? Think back to that goal we started with. What do you want people reading your content to know? What do you want them to feel? And what do you want them to do? I'm going to throw a question out there. And again, you can ponder this or you can answer it in the chat. I would love to see something in the chat. I know some of you are already, because I know some of the people in the room and I admire your online game. Some of you are already engaging in really robust professional online presence. Do you think about these questions when you are deciding what to post next? Your audience, what do you want them to know? What do you want them to feel? What do you want them to do? You can throw it in the chat. I'm going to keep going. This next thing we're going to think about is crafting the message. So we want to post with purpose. You've got other stuff to do in your day. When you post, you are going to want Yeah, exactly. Okay. The feeling one. Yeah. Someone said, I haven't thought about the feeling question, but the others, yes. That's an important one to consider, I think, when we're looking for, if you have an advocacy, if you want your audience to do something in response to what you're saying, you want to think about motivation. What's going to make them motivated to take an action that I'm hoping that they will take? So you know, I see a lot of this on LinkedIn, and I think they're great. I don't think there's anything wrong with this, but a lot of people will share observations or just updates. I'm at this job now. You know, I've left this job and I have this new opportunity. And it's you know, really nice stuff about this, the new adventure, and thanks for the good times. And that's really helpful to know. That tells you a lot about like what's going on in your network, who's where. It's useful information. Nothing wrong with sharing that. I also love when people say, I wrote this article here, please read it. And then their friends share it. And I think that's great too. Those are important things. But you might have occasion to be taking a position or advocating for something. And again, we're thinking through that kind of public interest lens here, where you really are looking for some kind of action. You want your audience to support this cause, whatever it may be. So these are steps that are really kind of with that outcome in mind. Why does this audience care about what I'm asking them to do? How am I going to frame this in a way that's going to make them either like realize they care about it, or consider maybe I do care about it, even if they like weren't really thinking about it before. Lay out the solution. There's a lot of important causes. A lot of things in the world today seem very dire and are very dire. When you are coming to your audience with a way to engage in an issue that you think is important, you're offering them an opportunity to be part of a solution, which is empowering, and it can give, it hopefully will make people feel good. Instead of just sort of like, oh God, that's a horrible thing that I've just been reminded of that exists in the world. So you're laying out a solution and an opportunity to engage. And that can be activating for your audience. So when you're writing, now some of these considerations, I'm going to say up front, some of you all are experts in your field, and your fields are specific. And you might really be writing for an audience that has a certain level of technical knowledge or expertise about an area, and that's okay. That is something about knowing your audience and writing for your audience. When you're writing for a broader group, in general, I recommend staying away from a lot of like really wonky terminology or jargon or acronyms. We love acronyms in this town. Messaging that's kind of too internal, that's not going to land or make sense with people outside of your close sphere. Using numbers and data is really helpful, but excessive numbers not coupled with a narrative that people can kind of latch onto can not land as well. And unfortunately, I hate to say this, sarcasm. I love sarcasm. You have to be an incredibly skilled writer with a really good understanding of your audience to deliver sarcasm the way you want to, in a way that will land the way you want it to land. So in general, I say, try to leave those out of your posts. People on social media, they're scrolling. We all do it. They spend an infinitesimal amount of time reading each particular post. I would say on LinkedIn, you have life doesn't move quite as fast on LinkedIn as it does on Twitter, say. But you don't want to bury the lead too much. You want to write with your most important takeaway top of your mind, so it doesn't take you too long to get there, and your audience can get there too. and I think everyone in the room is too smart for this too, but I'm just going to say it. If you're sharing an article, read it first, like really read it all the way through. And if it's an article on something that's kind of a hot topic right now, you read multiple articles from multiple sources. Share the best one. If you want to add your perspective, that's awesome. This kind of goes back to how much time do you have to spend? Because to be an effective, credible messenger, I'm going to take the position that you should have read not only that whole article, but a few other ones too on the subject. So factor that in. How much time are you willing to spend being a messenger on a particular topic? And the research, for lack of a better word, should factor into that. It's not just about churning out content. If you go back 2 days later and I'm like, oh, I misunderstood that. So you can get out ahead of that one and just spend the time up front deciding what you're going to read and what you're going to talk about online. Back to the data point, like I said, it is powerful. It should be used, provided it's from a good source, of course. When the narrative and the data is going together, you want to be conscious of whose story it is, that's being told, and what role, again, should your voice play. And again, that's not to say that your voice shouldn't play a role, but you should put some thought into what that looks like and how to do it in the most strategic and responsible way. So kind of getting back to the platforms here, the LinkedIn is by far the most popular here, and I agree. When we're talking about considering our own professional online presence, I think that's the obvious one. When you are thinking about capacity and how much time you're able to spend on this, there's a lot of recommendations out there about frequency of posting. And obviously huge brands are going to be posting like 20 times a day on Twitter. I'm going to guess that no one here has time for that. Twitter is kind of Twitter's the platform where you'll see more frequent posting. I would say LinkedIn, kind of like Facebook, similar to Facebook, you are looking at 1 to 5 a day, like a week per weekday, perhaps. But again, I think far more important than hitting some kind of quota is considering what your goal is as an individual person. With in terms of you're going to want to think about what type of content you're going to engage with, what type of content you're going to put out, how much time you have to devote to creating quality content. That's going to get you in the neighborhood of number of posts in a way that's much more realistic and helpful to you. Then you should be posting this many times per week on Facebook and on Twitter and on Instagram. If you are interested in graphics and creating graphics, I'm a Canva user myself. That's a free sort of graphic design service. There's multiple tiers of it, but there is a free version of it. If you want to incorporate that into your content. So this kind of brings me to the end of my workshop journey. A few of the sort of the thought games we've been playing about how these questions might play out for you. But I wanted to open up and see if there are any thoughts or questions that came up during the slides that we could think through as a group that might be helpful. And if there's nothing, then you'll get your Wednesday evening back earlier than I thought. But I would love to hear from folks. I don't think we're a massive group just yet, although I think people joined since we started.
You are welcome to raise your hand and we will kind of call on you and you can unmute, or if you don't want to unmute and or turn your camera on, feel free to throw something in the chat. I actually have a question. I'm about to take over right now, but I have a question. While you all are thinking of what your questions are, I'd like to expand a little bit more on sort of the frequency. in fact, I just tweeted that you had a better question. The better question is, what is your goal? And that sort of dictates the frequency. I guess the flip of that is, how do I keep people engaged? Are they looking for me to be posting all the time? Should I only post when I have something to say? How do I balance that?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I think that it is true that if you are silent for too long, the out of sight, out of mind thing becomes a reality. And algorithms, the social media algorithm is also a play here. So what I would recommend is, if you have, I still think that your goal should dictate your content. I still think that posting for the sake of posting is a good way to kind of drive yourself nuts. And I think that having your goal is still the North Star. But not all content takes a ton of time to create. So if there is, if there is an area that you feel pretty confident in your knowledge about, the journalists that are covering that area, the outlets that are covering that area, it's not outside the normal swing of things to be checking certain news sites or certain blogs or what have you. Sharing something like that on your social media is a pretty low lift. So you can mix that in, and then that you're not coming up with a graphic, you're not coming up with a thesis or something really clever here. So that's a way, interspersing that in, which means kind of monitoring what's going on social media and in the news on a specific area that you want to be a voice that people think of. They're like, oh, Christina really follows X issue. Follow it for real, and kind of be there with the share when stuff comes up. That shouldn't take too much time out of your day. But it is kind of making it a practice, making it a routine for yourself.
That is so fantastic. So we have a question on marketing skills. Thoughts on leveraging online presence as a marketing tool. So the skills that it takes, highlighting areas of practice, establishing credibility, sort of creating that network, maybe even looking for clients. Sort of what's too much? How do you do it? Walk us through that.
Yeah. I didn't get into this very much, but there are analytics. Is what I didn't get into as much, but you might consider, if marketing is something that you want to, is a skill you want to beef up and be able to say, not only do I know how to do this, here's me doing it, and kind of have your online presence speak for you. You might be someone who will want to look into those analytics tools, so that you can be measuring for yourself what kind of content is working for me with the audience that I want to cultivate. So it sounds like you're highlighting an area of practice and establishing credibility. You kind of know, I hope, who your audience is, and you're going to want to know if whatever you're posting is A, reaching them, and B, if they're reacting to it, they're going to engage with it. So I would say spending some time thinking about who the audience is that you want to see your content and what kind of engagement you're looking for from people. I think I would employ a little bit of analytics there to test out what's working. And then of course there's the what we call the last 3 feet of communication. There might be some specific individual that you're gonna want to engage and bounce things off of who are also familiar with that audience, to get engaged there. And then maybe clients. That's a good thought. So I wonder, one question I would have is, are your clients in the same audience as the network of experts? So if that's a different audience, how are you reaching them, and how are you talking to them? Are you talking to them offering your skills in an area of expertise that's going to appeal to them as sort of lay people per se, or for example? So I would get more specific. I would drill down on some of the questions we've already talked about audience and what we want to see happen, but with that specific scenario in mind, and I would use some analytics to see if it's working.
Analytics, that's brilliant. It's sort of along those lines, we have a question about kind of personal content. So
Mhm.
is there any room for showing who you are, your personality, kind of that piece of it, particularly if you, again, if you're looking for clients or you're looking to do marketing?
Yeah, right. Because especially if you're looking for clients, right? You're gonna want to convey obviously competence and professionalism and expertise and like that trustworthiness, someone that people are going to want to work with. You may want to offer up some part of who you are as a person as a way to kind of round out that picture. The level of detail will obviously differ depending on the circles that you're in, the platform that you're in. I think we've been talking about LinkedIn a lot. It can get personal on LinkedIn, but it generally stays on a pretty professional plane, I think, for the most part, from what I think. I don't think there's anything wrong with sharing what are ultimately personal observations or a little bit about your life. I don't think I can give you a one size fits all. This is okay to say, this is not okay to say, because at the end of the day, it obviously has to feel right and comfortable to you. It's got to be something you're okay with the world consuming. If it were me, I would think about how does what I'm sharing connect with my audience? Am I sharing something because, wow, this is an important issue and I actually have some personal experience with it, and I'm going to share a little bit about myself to kind of add that human element? Okay, I'm doing that, but I'm connecting it to something outside of myself. It's not my diary. It is not my journal. You are not my best friend or my therapist, but I have something personal to share here that's human and real, and people are interested in that. And then in other instances, it might be light. It might be just kind of like a light human universal experience that that you can throw in there that is relatable and adds another shade of texture to your content. And I think those can be really nice things that are useful. But it's you, it's your life. If it enhances your message and you can do so in a way that feels honest and correct and authentic to you and to the people in your family who might also be involved in whatever you're sharing, then that might be a really nice way to enhance your message. If it's something that a year from now you're going to read and be like, just spend a little bit of time thinking about that.
That is so helpful. Generally, we want to turn to another question. What tips do you have for helping the post reach a wide audience?
Yeah. So most platforms offer like you can pay. But I wasn't really thinking much in that vein with this thought of like sort of personal professional presence. I think that thinking about your network and thinking about going back to how you engage with other people's posts, part of the way for a wider audience to see it is for people to engage with it. So you might sort of organize around your post and say, hey, I'm posting this important thing. Can I, like, to your friends or your colleagues or whoever it makes sense in this context, to make sure the post gets some action, gets likes, gets shares. You doing that for other people in your networks, I think, will be helpful in that way as well, because your content stands a better chance of getting in front of their audience if it differs slightly from yours. So that kind of cross-pollination effect definitely helps, particularly sharing of posts really helps. If you're not, and audio and visual content. So a post, like I said, with a visual or with a little video clip the algorithm is going to treat it better than just plain text. So that's another way.
Fantastic. We have time for probably one or two more questions. Would you please identify profiles that you find intentional in their approach to online presence? That is a fabulous question.
Wow,
So
that
who do
is
you
such a
follow? Who do you like?
I know, that's a really good question. Oh my gosh. I might have to think about that one. Individual profiles who are intentional to their approach to online presence. I always love seeing Priyanka's post. I think she's with us today. I think she does a really nice job. And I will think on that. I will think on that. I think that there are some journalists that are, and I'll try to think of it specific people, but
Maybe what characteristics draw you to a poster where you think, oh, I'm going to follow that person?
right. I think when I'm able to identify pretty quickly what I can expect from that person, and that they're bringing something to the table that is kind of value added, and the table being like my timeline. So if it's a journalist, for example, if it's an area that they cover, a beat that they cover that's of interest to me, either professionally or personally, and I know that they are that they're kind of really level-headed, and I'm seeing good journalism from them, and I'm seeing good consistent contact, information that's useful, that's gonna get a quicker follow from me. When I'm seeing personally, when I'm seeing not only sporadic, but just kind of like a little bit about a lot of different things, I might think to myself, great, good for that person. I don't necessarily need to see that. But if I can get my head around like what that person's about and what they're going to add, what knowledge or information they're going to put in front of me, and it seems trustworthy, that's going to be a lot more appealing to me on like a professional level, as someone to follow. When it's mixed in with, you have something professional and then like 3 really personal posts that I don't really need to see, I'm probably not going to follow that person. But just if it's consistent, if it's useful, if it's value added, we all have a lot of information just passing before our eyes all day, every day. At this point, I'm judicious about who I'm going to add to that mix. So that's what I would say.
That is fantastic. We will have a follow-up email with the recording. And so I will make sure that I ask Renata to give us some tips for who are good people to sort of use as examples for the follow-up email. And let me look. So
it really
last
does
question.
depend on where, like what area you're in. I will say that. Right? So I will try to think of some good examples, but that is unfortunately the vague answer that I think is what I want.
Well, it's hard.
What networks are you trying to get in front of? Yeah, literally
like any good lawyer, it depends.
It depends.
That was a very lawyer answer. I love it. All right. Well, I don't see any final questions. So I will say my 2 minutes. Thank you, Renata. That was so incredibly helpful. I wrote down at least 3 or 4 things. I was trying to tweet at the same time. And so I did put a couple tips up there. I know Priyanka's going to follow up with some additional information. If folks have any questions, feel free to reach out and I will get those answers for you. Look for the follow-up email, maybe by the end of the week, but definitely by Monday. And I appreciate you all coming and joining this conversation with us. Now go forth and use social media to take care of that professional goal. Thank you, Renata, so much for your wisdom. Take care.
Pleasure. Have a good evening, everyone.